Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Thank you for being here. We are here today to discuss the permits and documents that you need to join the commissary, or really just to become a legal food business operating in Monroe County. So that means if you are going to be selling food directly to the public via catering, a virtual restaurant, food truck, like that, or if you're going to be using going to be doing packaged food goods. So we have experts who can speak to both of those types of specialties. So thank you everybody for being in attendance. This is being recorded so that if you're bye, love you. That if you are not able to stay through the whole thing, it will be recorded. If you know somebody who would really benefit from this workshop but isn't able to be here today, they can always watch it recorded on our website once we get it uploaded. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So I do recommend that you stick around if you can, because we're going to be doing a Q&A session. We're going to run pretty quickly through the topics, and we're hoping to hold at least a half an hour at the end, starting around 1, maybe even a little bit earlier, to answer your questions. So you'll see, for everybody who's a participant, at the bottom, if you're familiar with Zoom, you're probably most familiar with the chat option. We're suggesting not using the chat option, but using the Q&A instead. Put your questions there. I'm going to be looking at them, and I'll hold them until the end. I think there's even an option for you to upvote questions. So if you see that somebody, if you can see that not everybody can, if you ask a question, you can say, oh yeah, I really want to know about that question too. You can upvote it. It looks like in the chat, even though I'm saying not to use the chat, I understand we're just getting started. People in the audience are having a hard time hearing me. I'm the only one that's speaking so far. Roger, would you mute yourself if possible? Or?
Certainly, Laura.
Great, thank you. That might help. And okay, it looks like other people can hear. So Frank, you gotta figure it out for yourself maybe. So I also really recommend that as we go along, that you go to the page where you got the webinar link, the workshops page on our website. So as it says here, this is not clickable for you guys, but rochestercommissary.org. The workshops tab down at the bottom, you can say click here, and there is the PDF that we're going to be following along today. So the way that we're doing this, we're going to go over several topics, but really they are different permits and documents that you're going to need in order to, again, be a legal food business, be it at the commissary or in your own space. And we're going to have our experts walk through that. So if you have questions as they come up, add them to the Q&A, and we're going to go over them at the end. They might get answered during the actual presentation, either by them or by me asking a couple clarifying questions. But Michaela, let's go to the next slide. So we're very lucky today. Thank you to all of our panelists who are presenting. We have 2 attorneys from Harder Secrest Emery, Matthew Eldred and Lindsay Bober. They are both going to be speaking about different topics related to setting up your food business legally, and considerations for both cost and risk associated with that. Then we're going to have Roger Panera, who is an insurance agent with Canandaigua Insurance Agency. Insurance is very scary, and there's a lot of ways that things can go wrong, but it can also just be really intimidating. So Roger's going to help make sense of that. Then we have Joe Zielinski from the Monroe County Health Department. He's going to be speaking about procuring a health permit, as well as the food safety handling course that is required if you're going to be a member of the commissary, or frankly, if you're if you own a food business, or if you're going to be a manager at a food business, you have to have that food safety handling. It's a great investment in your career if you're looking to be in food. And then we have Bruno and Shannon from Cornell Food Venture Center. They're going to be talking all things packaged food goods, and they are real experts in the field. So you will have a lot to learn from them. So one other thing I recommend is so that you can see all of the presenters as they're presenting, because we're going to be sharing the screen, and so that you have a face kind of to go with it, is at the top right, you can go over to the show active speaker option, or the show thumbnail video, so that you can see multiple people or just the presenter. But that's a nice option, so you don't feel like you're just staring at a screen the whole time. And then, as I said, throw all your questions in Q&A, and we'll answer them at the end. So next slide, please, Michaela. And Matthew, you're gonna take it away from here.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm glad to be here, glad to help out. I'm going to be covering kind of three general areas today. The first is we're going to talk about the form of your business, and I mean the legal form of your business. It's going to be the basics of these entities, which we'll touch on in a second, and then compare and contrast them to just running as a doing business as or DBA name. And why those differences matter, and how they might impact you as you move forward with your business. Next would be, once you've chosen a business form, then we'll cover how you go about actually forming that business entity. And then the last will be the sales tax aspect, and what you need to do to start collecting sales tax, and then just kind of have a general understanding of your rights and responsibilities and obligations under sales tax. So starting with these business entity type slide, the one that we're on now, the most basic form under which to operate a business is as a sole proprietor, that is just as yourself and in your own name. If you don't want to run your name as, Mr. John Smith, then you can file what's called a DBA, or use a doing business as name, and that would ultimately be kind of presented as John Smith doing business as Curly's Cupcakes or something like that. You need to, though, register that name, Curly's Cupcakes in that case, with the locality in which you're operating. So if you're operating in Monroe County, that means you need to file a form that we'll touch on a little bit more later, in Monroe County, that says, hey, I, John Smith, am going to operate as Curly's Cupcakes. So that way, if anyone says, hey, I bought some bad cupcakes and got sick from Curly's Cupcakes, who the heck do I talk to about paying my medical bills? Then you can go to Monroe County, and they can tell you, hey, you need to talk to John Smith because he's actually the guy behind Curly's Cupcakes. What that means, though, is that when they go and talk to you about being sick, you are personally liable for any results of any lawsuit, any debts, anything like that that might be associated with your business, because you're just operating as you. Okay, so there's a lot of risk involved with operating under a DBA. And as we'll touch on a little bit, if at all possible, it's good to avoid them. The next kind of layer of kind of complicated structure would be a partnership, and that's really just when there's two of you. And if you're operating with somebody else as partners together, not just as employer and employee, but as a partner, you've essentially formed under the law of general partnership. And you will both be on the hook for the liabilities that might result from the business during that time. The next step up from that is a corporation, and kind of on the same footing as a limited liability company. Corporation we're all familiar with. The difference between a corporation and the first two examples that we talked about before, the partnership and the sole proprietorship, is that the entity becomes an entirely new person for purposes of the law. That means that it's the person who gets sued, it's the person who incurs liabilities, it's the person that has bank accounts, it's the person that has the debts. So what that means is that even though you might be the sole stockholder of, Curly's Cupcakes Inc., if Curly's Cupcakes Inc. gets in trouble, uh, or you do something as operating as Curly Cupcakes Inc. that causes somebody trouble, that means that only Curly Cupcakes assets are at risk and not yours. So not your home, not your car, not your family. Only to the extent that you've made an investment in Curly's Cupcakes uh, would you be liable. Obviously, that could potentially be unfair because you might not have a whole lot of investment. Curly's Cupcakes might not have a whole lot of assets, and if somebody gets sick and all they have is recourse against Curly's Cupcakes, then they might not be able to recover all of the potential liability. And with that risk comes additional responsibility. So that means that you need to file your corporation with the state. So for the same purposes with the DBA, somebody can find you and figure out who you are. And that also means that you need to use corporation or corp or inc or something like that in the name so that folks know when they're dealing with Curly's Cupcakes Inc. that they're dealing with an entity that might not have assets to support the risks. Same goes for a limited liability company. You get to sequester your investment, your risk, and separate it from your own assets, your private assets. Folks still, though, have the right to know who they're dealing with. The difference between a limited liability company and a corporation for most purposes is that a limited liability company has a more simplified structure and basic rules. So without having to go through a lot of complicated internal machinations, a limited liability company can more or less be started by one person and kind of run under the law pretty successfully without having to make a whole bunch of decisions about a stockholder rules and all this sort of thing like in bylaws. So we can move on to the next slide now. I'll add for partnerships, corporations, and limited liability companies, you would need an employer identification number, an EIN, with the federal IRS for each of those entities. They can be found or they can be applied for and found on the IRS website. There's an EIN assistant. The EIN is really just a social security number for those entities. So you think of it as the same way, and it helps you file your corporate income taxes or any other sort of federal tax documents that might need to be filed at the end of the year once you start operating. Okay, so other online resources though, and this will help you both decide what entity you might choose and then get it actually going. So the first is the New York State Secretary of State's Division of Corporations website, and you'll easily find it with a Google search. This will help you pick a name because you can't use a name that's already in use if you're going to use an entity, so a partnership, an LLC, or corporation. And if you just search separately at New York State Entity Search, you'll easily find the website where you can see what names are currently in use and see if the one you want to use is available. So if I want to use Curly's Cupcakes and I go on to the Division of Corporations website and it's already taken, Curly's Cupcakes Inc. or LLC or something like that, anything confusingly similar, I won't be able to form my entity under that name. Also on the Division of Corporations website, there's plenty of lists and resources to tell you what sorts of paperwork needs to be filed for each entity, the fees that will be due, and the process necessary to get them formed. And then in some cases, particularly with LLCs, the articles of organization, which is the formation documents for an LLC, there's a basic form for a single member LLC available right there on the Division of Corporations website, a fillable form that you can use and file with the state. You should have no problems as long as your name is appropriate and you've not left any blanks in there and basically filled in the rest of the information correctly. The more local resource is the Monroe County Economic Development website. There you can find the information for filing a DBA and an application for filing a DBA. However, due to the current situation, they're only taking them by mail, so there might be a little bit of a delay. And there you can also find information on the certifications and licenses you might already be familiar with. And I think Joe might talk a little bit more about those areas later, and is probably more familiar than I am with this website generally. But there's also your local county tax forms and a startup guide as well. And finally, I'll add that you know, please don't, speaking as attorney, this might sound like I'm self-interested, but please don't use LegalZoom or other websites, and I'll tell you why. The documents there, you don't know when they came onto the website, so they might be outdated. You don't know where they came from, and you don't know both where they came from geographically, so you don't know if they were meant for New York or New Jersey or California or whatever, and each state has different laws. And you don't know where they came from, meaning what circumstances they were originally drafted for, because really they are just bring downs, extractions of forms that have been used for other projects that other folks have had. So it's definitely never going to be meant for your exact situation. And although they might look really sophisticated and you might think, oh, that's great, this one's 5 pages long and it's better than the one-page form that's on the New York State website, that's not true. The default rules under the law that will govern your entity if you choose to form one are generally set up to be generalized in your favor to provide you with the most flexibility possible. And a longer form with more legalese that might look more sophisticated is probably only going to wind up backing you into a corner that you don't want to be into further down the road. So you want to maintain as as an owner of a young business as much flexibility as possible as you grow your business. So that's my stump speech for not using LegalZoom as an attorney. So next slide, please. So which entity type should you use here? If you haven't guessed already, I think under these situations that we're dealing with here, if at all practicably possible, you should go with either a corporation or an LLC, and probably an LLC. Obviously, that's because it protects you and your assets and your family. Okay, you're not personally on the hook if you've done everything right, and by everything right, I mean what's necessary is that you treat that separate legal person as a separate legal person, separate from yourself. So it has its own separate bank account. You maintain the name, including using the suffix, the LLC or the Inc. or the Corp or whatever suffix that goes along with the entity type. You maintain separate records apart from your own. When you enter into a contract, if you enter into a contract, you don't enter into that contract in your own name. So at the top of the contract where it says by and between, FedEx in what would be you enter the company's name and not yourself. You sign on behalf of the company in your officer, director, or manager capacity, those contracts. And then with regards to an LLC, it will just make it easier as your business grows to potentially take on investment, protect yourself from third parties, pay taxes, receive loans, etc. In the LLC, as I said before, the default rules are under the law, both state and the IRS laws for that matter, are meant for small business owners like yourself. With kind of one catch with the LLC that makes it a little bit more difficult, there's a publication process that you need to be aware of that's further detailed on the state's website, where when you form your LLC, you need to publish a note of the formation of that LLC in a local newspaper for a certain number of days. And there's a list of newspapers on Monroe County's website. There's a rather small charge for doing that. And once you're done, I think it's maybe 90 days, then that's kind of water under the bridge. So one little catch, but for the benefit that you get from that and the simplicity that comes in an LLC, it's really a small price to pay. So, however, if you cannot form one or the other, and you're the only person that's in the business, as I've said before, you're risking your home, your savings, and potentially your future. So some risk can be controlled through contract. That is a contract through your own name, but that's going to take a lot of negotiation every time you enter into a contract to get the same sort of protections that naturally come along with a new or with an actual entity, and that is an LLC or corporation. And you'll ultimately wind up spending less time and money, because they're pretty much the same, as all small business owners know, if you just form an entity in the first place. And this is true even if your business is just a hobby, because it's not about you. It's not about what you're doing and the extent to which you're operating. The state is concerned and the law is concerned about protection of the consumer. So if you make a bad cupcake as a hobby, or if you make a bad cupcake as Hostess cupcakes and somebody gets sick either way, then the law is interested in making that person whole and giving that person justice, regardless of whether you did it in your basement or you did it in some large factory. So If you cannot form an LLC, please be extremely careful. Please form one as soon as possible. All of the relationships that you form during the time, okay, it's not a one shot opportunity. All of the things that you're doing, if you can't form an entity now, can eventually be converted to a relationship between that entity and your customers, or that entity and your suppliers, or whomever, your landlord and whatever, down the line when you do get an entity form. So please, if you can't now and you do form an entity later, please make sure you take that additional step rather than think, well, my opportunity passed. So next, please. Now we can talk about sales tax. So New York requires that sales tax be paid on any of the types of goods or services to which the law applies. And that quite often applies to restaurant style food. And the way the law works is that you actually become an arm of the state in some ways. And although the state requires a collection of that sales tax, it makes you, the seller, responsible for collecting that sales tax and kind of doing that on the state's behalf. Okay. There's caveats to this. So, and this concept applies to all states. So, if you're down on the southern tier and you wind up going over to something in Pennsylvania or something like that, then you may have to collect sales tax in Pennsylvania as well. And that's because these laws apply whenever you have a physical presence in the state or an adequate contact with its people. So if you're doing, sometimes depending on the level of contact you have over the internet, you might even be responsible for collecting sales tax in other states or for sales in other states over the internet, as we've all kind of been aware of, I'm sure. So the sales tax certificate of authority is called a certificate of authority because it's actually the state authorizing you to collect sales tax on its behalf, and that certificate is the evidence of that authority to your customers. So they know that they're paying the extra 8.5%, or depending on locality, 8 and 7/8% or whatever, that you're collecting that on the state's behalf and will pay it over to the state. Okay, so you can apply for that certificate online at the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance website. Again, an easy Google. You can set up your account there. They have a pretty good resource or utility for setting up those accounts. And along with that, though, kind of to lay out the timeline here, once you've got your entity set and you've got your EIN for your entity, which would be the second thing you do, then you should go out and set up a separate bank account for that entity in order to maintain that separation between that person, quote unquote legal person, and you. Then you can use a separate bank account for collection of tax. So you should actually think about setting up 2 bank accounts with sales tax going into one, and your revenue from your business going into another. Whether that's a checking account or whatever that helps you operate the business. And then taxes are generally paid on a quarterly basis. I say generally because there are some tweaks to that depending on the type of business or the way you collect money or the size. But all of that information can be found further, and you can kind of suss all that stuff out. If you look at the bottom of the slide there at the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance publication 750, if you search that, it'll pop right up. It's a very thorough, fairly easy to read PDF that'll answer some questions that provide more detail than we have time for here today. And then I caution everyone that there's a lot of, or there's great importance in collecting sales tax, mostly because, again, you can be held liable if you don't. Okay, so it's your butt that's on the line if you don't do it. You're selling something that is susceptible or on which sales tax has to be paid. Just for failing to have a certificate, it's a $500 fine on the first day, and it goes up to $10,000 from there. And you also have to, or you have the obligation to keep adequate records to show that you've been paying the appropriate tax. And there's also a responsibility to display this certificate so that your customers can see it, even if that's on your truck or your cart or wherever you're selling your materials or products from. And I should also point out that if you don't do this, then because you think that, well, it's no big deal, I'm not doing that much business, and I don't really want to have to charge people an additional 8% because I feel like I'm already overcharging them. Don't do that, because you're only going to hurt yourself and others, because it encourages others to do the same to stay competitive, and then you kind of wind up kind of putting yourself and others at risk. One other question that comes up sometimes and that I'm aware of with applying online for the certificate is in these circumstances, what address should you use? If you do not have a physical address from which you're operating your business, like a quote unquote business location, then you should use your home address. And that's where the materials will be sent to you, the certificate will be sent to you. The state DTF will contact you if they need to, and that sort of thing. Okay, last slide. So the big picture here, I don't know if everyone has, that doesn't have corporate legal training fully understands and appreciates the difference between a legal entity and operating as an individual and the risks that means to the consumer. But that's really an important thing to recognize here, right? The concern here is the state is interested in protecting consumers. They need to be able to figure out who you are if something goes wrong so that you can be held accountable. And the consumer needs to know what attendant risks come along with doing business with you if you're operating through an entity. So those are big picture things. The state's looking out for they're not trying to regulate you and make it hard for you to do your business and stuff. They're just trying to look out for the consumers that you're doing business with. And then the last thing is having the certificate of authority indicates to the consumers that you're doing the right thing, collecting tax by the state, you're authorized to do so, and that you're not either taking that money and pocketing it or kind of trying to slide under the radar by not collecting it all. So again, just kind of a form of consumer protection. And of course, we all want to protect our consumers because we want them to keep coming back to us so we can continue to build our business with them and others. So that's what I've got for today, and I'll hand it off to the next presenter.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was great. Before we get started with Roger, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions too,
Sure.
and maybe summarize some things. So that was very helpful. I think very globally, you're saying LLC is the way to go.
Yep.
And that everything that they need to do that, they can find at the New York State Department of New York Department of State Division of Corporations.
Yep.
And find the fillable forms there. You are not recommending using LegalZoom or similar online resources, but especially in the wake of the pandemic, I want us to be very cognizant of people being strapped for cash as they're putting together their businesses, right? Because what we don't want to do is have people say, "Oh, I'll just stay," an underground illegal business instead of legitimizing. What can you recommend in terms of a process that someone can take if they are strapped for cash?
So a process towards eventually becoming legitimate when they do have the cash, or becoming legitimate right now?
No, meaning in lieu of using LegalZoom.
Yeah.
What do you recommend if they're trying to be really cash conscious?
Yeah, so I think outside of the filing fees for an LLC, there's very little actual paperwork that needs to be filed. Okay, so and I'm speaking to an LLC, which I'll just focus on now. So what you have to file with the state is the Articles of Organization, it's called. And for a sole member LLC, so an individual operating as a sole owner of that limited liability company, so you will own 100% of the membership interest in the company as opposed to owning some other percentage with some other, co-investor or co-owner or something like that. There's a perfectly acceptable form right on the state's website, a fillable PDF that you can then submit to the state. And it's completely freely accessible. There's another document that people might have heard of before called an LLC agreement or an operating agreement. Although it's not advisable as a sole member LLC, there are adequate default provisions in New York state law for you to be able to operate without an operating agreement, at least for the time being. An operating agreement gets a lot more detailed, and I think that's something that you should have the help of an attorney for.
And that's where the
But
expense privacy then comes in.
yeah,
Right.
but getting that first document filed is all you need to start enjoying those protections. And then from there, it's obtaining an EIN. Well, the publication process that goes along with filing an LLC, which I'm not sure. I think every newspaper has a little bit different of a rate, but it's not very much. I mean, I think we're talking less than $100. Um, and from there, it's obtaining an EIN. Again, low cost and no form and no documents that need the drafting of an attorney. And then from there, it's obtaining your sales tax certificate and registering with the state to collect and pay sales tax. Again, all able to be done online. So I think it's a relatively low cost to begin with, just to get something in place.
Okay.
And then worry about it kind of, once you have some revenue going, or kind of once, times get back to normal, to wonder about kind of prettying things up. It's not uncommon. Okay. It's not an unstable position necessarily to go about it that way. We have clients come all the time that have fairly mature businesses that kind of started out that way. And we're able, under most circumstances, to manage, any risks that might have developed during that time from not having a fully developed operating agreement or something like that.
Okay. And so if somebody is, because I think probably on the webinar today, as well as just generally speaking for who we've talked to that's interested in joining the commissary, we have kind of maybe two groups of people who right now their food business is maybe a hobby,
Hmm.
and they are considering, they're making it legal, right? Because you have to be a legal food business in order to join the commissary, but they're not really totally committed to making it a full-time thing. And then we have people who maybe have an established underground business and know that they're in it for the long haul. And for this latter group, it certainly sounds like the LLC is the way to go. Do you recommend, once again, being cash conscious, if somebody is on the fence of, is this a hobby? Is this going to be a real thing? Should they go through all the hoops for an LLC, or does it ever make sense to start with a lower cost option and then mature into an LLC? Or are you just recommending LLC across the board?
Yeah, I mean, I recommend an LLC across the board. That's not to say, that people haven't done it for, decades now without going that route, or for decades at least, going back to when we had LLCs in place, or in the state. Uh, like I said, if it's absolutely basically impossible, or it would otherwise make you not want to do your business, if you had to form an LLC and incur that cost and kind of strife, then if but you are comfortable with filing a DBA, or just operating under your own name or something like that, then please consider the risks that are associated with your business. If you were your consumer, what risks might you think about possibly having to deal with? And then, do the best to control those risks in the meantime. Um, it, but even in that includes, if you have supplier contracts or any sort of, a lease or something with a commissary, try to make sure of your level of responsibility is something, will come back to you personally, and make sure that you're willing to accept that responsibility, in the way that any economic responsibility might impact, you and your family.
And that was a great piece of advice that you said, that when you're signing a contract, never use your own name. You're always signing, as a representative for the corporation, to
Yep.
not take on that personal liability. I think that's a great point. And then, I guess, to wrap up, since we've got to keep it moving. I have so many questions, so I wanted to get those in while I could. That the news on sales taxes, it's not worth skipping it. That the penalties really are that great. It's not worth trying to get away from it. And that's that. And
Yeah, that's true. And just to be clear, if people are conscious about how they are pricing things or publishing prices on things, then you always have the option of, asterisking every price or something like that, or indicating somewhere like sales tax included. And just
Yep.
know that you're going to have to pay that percentage of sales tax as appropriate out of that amount that you're charging.
Yeah.
So, so something else to keep in mind, because I know sometimes people are like, oh God, I don't want to have to tack that on because that makes it seem like I'm charging even more. So there is that option.
Yeah, and then always a good idea in your company's bank account to have some restricted funds, um, so that you're not spending money that you may have collected, knowing that you're going to have to pay your quarterly sales tax
Yep.
too.
Yep.
Okay, great, Matthew. Thank you so much, and all the panelists, please plan to stay on the call so that we can have a Q&A at the end. We are getting some questions for sure. So moving right along, Roger, we're talking insurance. Can you unmute yourself and turn on your video, Roger?
Mute, and
I can hear you
then,
now.
okay, now we've got to get the video. How's
Great,
that?
wonderful. The beautiful car office. We know it well now these days.
The car office on the fly. That's the way it works for the
Yep.
insurance brokers.
Yep. All right. So maybe it'll be helpful. I think everybody has in front of them what the doc, what we're suggesting in terms of liability, and then I just want you to then take it from there and explain what it means in terms that are not intimidating to insurance agents. So I'm just going to read that. I'm sorry if I'm boring everybody, but just so that we're all on the same page. If you're going to be in the commissary, you must provide a certificate of insurance covering yourself and your businesses per 1 million per occurrence and 2 million in aggregate for both general and product. And Rochester Commissary LLC must be named as additionally insured and endorsed in your policy, and then you would put in our address, which is there. So start by explaining what that means, and then let's talk about the other types of insurances that a food business, and you're very familiar with the commissary and the setup, what other types of insurances they may be required or should consider.
Okay, so let's start with the certificate of insurance requirements for the commissary. So in reviewing that, the per occurrence at 1 million is the most that an insurance company will pay for any one claim. And then the aggregate is at 2 million, as you mentioned, and that's the most that they will pay in any 1 year. So when there is a claim, that is all that they are going to pay on your behalf as an entity. I like to sell and teach by example. When I returned from claim school, which is my background in insurance, I was involved in a claim with the Marriott in Rochester. They had a buffet on a Sunday morning the week before Easter, about 25 years ago. And they served bad hollandaise sauce. And there were about 50 claims on that policy at that point. It was a very messy claim, and the policy limits were paid in that case. So not to get too complicated, bad things can happen, but the insurance company will stand behind you up to $1 million. And when you're starting in the commissary, it's you're probably not going to run into a situation like I described there. As far as the cost of insurance for what would be needed, it can run anywhere between $350 for a minimum limits or minimum premium policy up to $10,000 for somebody that is packaging or manufacturing something at the commissary and that is growing. So be prepared. Anywhere in between that area would be the cost for a policy to get you going. And then as far as other recommendations, other than the general liability that we had talked about in the certificate of insurance, if you have any employees, you are going to be required to carry New York State workman's compensation for on-the-job related injuries and New York State disability policy for anyone that is hurt off the job that is an employee of yours.
And thankfully, Lindsay will be covering that in the next section too, as to how you go about more on the legal side of things. But Roger, just from working with you, so for full disclosure, Roger is providing the insurance for the commissary, and for going through, which thankfully for all of you is a much more complicated insurance situation than for a food business for the most part. My biggest recommendation is start early. Start your conversation early with your insurance agent, so that they really understand what your business is all about, so that they understand that you're working in a shared kitchen facility. That is foreign in the Rochester area. Roger, and in this information, he has his contact information. If you want to talk to him and get a quote from him, he's familiar. And therefore, we're working with, is it Liberty Mutual?
It's actually Selective, will be the carrier that handles the commissary.
Okay.
But I have various carriers, and it will depend on your class of business. What we are going to do with the quoting, the most price competitive options that are going to protect you the best. So, yeah.
But
as we go through this, we will be able to tell where to place you.
Yeah, and so always good to write plenty of time, meaning give yourself a lot of time to shop around and make sure that you're getting the best policy possible. Don't put it off. Don't wait to the last minute. That's my advice.
Correct.
To the people listening in. Anything you want to say generally about other types of insurance that you see food businesses often carrying, or is it really just so specific in terms of, I think, Michaela, can we go to the next slide? The third slide, I think, for him. So because we have such a range of types of food businesses, do we want to talk about other things that you recommend, or is this really just something for people to talk to their insurance agent about specifically because it's so specific to what they're doing? Oh, Roger, you're in and out.
I'm sorry. Is that coming back now?
I would turn off your video. I would turn off your video and just leave the sound so that we can all hear you better.
Okay, let's turn the video off. There we go. Okay.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. All right, Roger, I think we left you. All right, in the interest of time, we're going. Oh, you're back, Roger.
Yep, my apologies.
All right, Roger, we're gonna Roger, we're gonna move on. We're gonna move on, and we will have you weigh in this in the Q&A.
Thank you.
All right, great. So next slide, please. Okay, Lindsay, you are up.
Hi, everyone. I am going to talk a little bit about the employer obligations that you need to fulfill in terms of the permits and the documents that are required. Before I sort of jump in, I just want to note that there are a lot of other things that employers are required to do under state and federal law, such as complying with wage and hour laws and things of that nature. Today, we're really just going to be focusing on these documents that you need in order to start up your legal food business. But I would encourage you all to familiarize yourself with the wage and hour laws, non-discrimination laws, and other requirements that you may have as an employer. Next slide, please. So under state law, businesses are required to carry certain types of insurance coverage for their employees, including workers' compensation insurance, which Roger mentioned earlier, contribute to unemployment insurance, as well as carrying disability and paid family leave insurance for their employees. And while we hope that employers will choose to participate in these things because they recognize that it's valuable for their employees and can help their business, there are some significant consequences if you don't comply. And so we're going to go through really quickly what the requirements are for who's required to carry these types of insurances. But I've included the websites below each type if you want to check out more information about these requirements and what it covers and what it doesn't cover and things like that. So both workers' compensation insurance and the disability and paid family leave insurance programs are run through the Workers' Compensation Board. That's the government agency that requires you to have this type of insurance, but those policies would be through a private insurer. But if you have questions about what you're required to, what coverage you're required to have, so that would be the website to go to. And then for unemployment insurance, this is run through the New York State Department of Labor. And so I've included the link there to the information for employers. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there can be significant costs for failing to comply with these requirements, including monetary penalties. There's even civil and criminal charges. For example, if you don't comply with the workers' compensation coverage requirements, you can be charged with up to a felony offense, depending on how many employees you have. Business owners can also be held personally liable if they don't have the required insurance, and the government can issue stop work orders, which is exactly what it sounds like, where, for example, the Workers' Compensation Board can tell your business that you need to stop working because you don't have the required insurance. And we don't want your business to face any of these things, so we want to make sure that you understand whether or not you are required to obtain this type of coverage and can fulfill all of your obligations. Next slide, please. So for workers' compensation, this is the one that almost all employers in New York State are required to cover some number of people associated with their business for. So all for-profit businesses who have employees are required to have workers' compensation coverage. And when we talk about employees for the purpose of the workers' compensation law, this is defined much more broadly than what we may generally think of as being employees for purposes of wage payments and things like that. You'll notice that I've bolded volunteers and family members as both being included for employees. So even if you're not necessarily paying someone or not paying a family member who is working for your business, you may still be required to have a workers' compensation policy that would cover that employee. There are exceptions. The most notable for folks that are on this call would be for business owners who do not have employees. So this would be a sole proprietor or the individuals involved in a partnership or an LLC who employ no other people. And that would mean you don't have, your wife or your child who's even just volunteering from time to time. Really, it means no employees whatsoever. And additionally, some one or two person corporations where those individuals hold all of the corporate offices and all of the stock together may be exempted from that as well. Next slide, please. For unemployment insurance, this is run through the government and funded through taxes that the employer pays on wages that are paid to employees. And so unless specifically excluded by law, all services that an employee performs would be covered by unemployment, and the employer would be required to be contributing to the unemployment insurance fund for that employee. And so this includes part-time employees, temporary employees, and even your seasonal employees. There are some notable exceptions though. So for example, the spouse or the child who's under 21 of a sole proprietor would not be someone that you would need to be contributing to unemployment for those people because they're specifically excluded. And so if you check out that employer page on the Department of Labor website, there's additional exclusions as well, but the most common for small businesses would be the spouse or child exclusion. Next slide, please. And last, what we're going to talk about today is the disability and paid family leave insurance. These are two separate programs, but they are controlled by the same section of the law. So we're going to talk about them together. And most insurance companies will provide both to a business. So if you are required to provide disability insurance or to have disability insurance, you also are required to have paid family leave insurance, and they're together in one policy, even though they're funded differently under the statute. But important for you to know is that most private employers that have one or more employees are required to obtain disability or paid family leave and paid family leave insurance in New York State. And I say most because the actual test is that you have to have have one or more employees for 30 days within a calendar year. So if you have somebody who only works for you 1 day a week, and that's the only person who's employed by your business, there's a chance that you may not be required to have a policy. But for most private employers, if you have anybody who's working for you, you would be required to have this insurance. Similar to unemployment insurance, there are some significant exclusions that may be relevant to folks on the call. So for example, if you have a minor child of the employer who's working for the business, they would not be required to be on a disability policy or paid family leave policy. And similarly, the spouse of an employer may be excluded, but this one requires you to take an additional step. The default is that if your spouse is an employee of the business, they would be required to be on the policy. However, you can file a spousal exclusion form, which is available on the Workers' Compensation Board website, that would allow you to exclude your spouse from coverage. So for sole proprietors or one-person businesses where your only employee is your spouse and you're trying to cut down on costs, that might be a way to try to reduce your costs. However, recognize that if you file that spousal exclusion form, your spouse would not be able to participate in these programs and receive payments from disability or paid family leave program if they otherwise would qualify. So the most important takeaways, I think, for the folks on the call would be to, first of all, figure out whether or not you are required to have coverage under these laws. And then if you are not, there is a form that you can fill out, and there's a link on that document that the commissary has put together for you that would enable you to certify that you have no employees, and that would suffice. Otherwise, you're going to need to obtain these types of policies so that you can have the required certificate to show that you're in compliance with the law.
Excellent, Lindsay. Thank you. That was efficient. Wonderful. And once again, if anybody had any questions about that section, throw them in the Q&A, and we will get back to Lindsay with those questions after our two final presenters are up. All right, thank you, Lindsay. All right, Joe Zielinski from the Health Department is on next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Great.
And we can see you too. So there are two such easy topics for you because you know them inside and out.
Yeah.
All I'm basically going to do is say, Joe, please explain them. So
Okay.
first, can we start with the food worker certification and just
All right, could I start with topic 7? Will make more sense if we start with number 7.
Absolutely.
Okay. Hey, I'd like to comment on what Roger said earlier about the holiday sauce. I guess along with him, not that we ever knew each other, but I remember the holiday sauce. I got people sick because we were involved with that one, and that changed the way we deal with eggs now. So, and back then, that's what happens. Okay. In terms of the incubator kitchen permit, it was created really by you guys. Well, it was created by us, but it was created by us at your request to enable people who have perhaps little or not much experience in food service, to give them an opportunity to attempt doing food service on their own, bringing them into this realm of restaurants. I know for years I've seen people leave their jobs, they quit their jobs, their full-time jobs working for some corporation, and they go on to opening a restaurant not knowing anything about it with no help. They open the restaurant, and 6 or 7 or 8 months later, they're closing the restaurant. They didn't have any experience, they didn't have any advice, they didn't have any support. So I think that's what this whole incubator kitchen is about, and that's part of what the incubator permit is about. Is that correct, Laura?
That is very well said. And I do, for everybody listening, I do want to give a plug to the Monroe County Health Department because they have been really wonderful allies throughout this whole process. As probably a lot of you know, the reason that you're interested in joining the commissary is because we are the only facility of our kind in upstate New York. And it was because the health department was willing to partner with us and allow a shared kitchen facility that this is possible. If they hadn't allowed it 4 years ago when we started working on it, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere with it. So
Yep. Yep. And of course, it wasn't allowed. So, I mean, it's something new, something we got to look at and give folks an opportunity to get started a correct track in their food service profession, if that's what they choose.
So my understanding is currently, and I will say, and if anybody joined before noon, you could hear us talking about it, that I am hopeful that we're going to get a lower cost annual permit. But that just hasn't been decided yet. As everyone can well imagine, the health department has been very busy over the past couple months.
Yeah, a lot of us have diverted to coronavirus and other duties.
So we understand that the timing is not perfect, but the hope is, at least for the time being, that if you're planning to join the commissary when we open in September, that you apply for the incubator permit for the 3 months for the $75, and that, fingers crossed, come January there might be a cheaper option than that $225 that is levied as a fee for a standalone restaurant.
So that current permit fee is for 3 months, and if someone came in and they started in December, that would go for 3 months, December, January, February, and then either get renewed or expire depending on what the operator decides on. The other option is to go with the annual permit, which is $225 right now. But the annual permit, it doesn't go from a year from when you started. It's for the calendar year. So if one starts in January, that $225 gets you through the year. If one starts in October, that only gets you through December. So having that $75 3-month option is certainly, if you're looking at opening in September, that would probably be the best option for everybody, actually.
That's a great point, because I think most people would probably assume that it wasn't a calendar year. I didn't know that. So that's a great clarifying point.
Okay,
and then in terms of what they're filling out, they're still filling out the standard form, correct?
Well, there's an application for a incubator kitchen. I believe there's a separate permit for that, or application for that. In fact, I know there is.
Okay.
And along with that, then a copy of the disability, the proof of disability, and workman's comp, or waivers for it, as Lindsay talked about, would come along with that in terms of submitting that application. And right now, we have only, our walk-in service has been suspended due to Corona. So that means that people can email us permit applications. They can call in on credit card, fees that may have to be paid. They could do it via fax. And the other way they could do it the old-fashioned way is the mail. Mail works great. And you can still put a paper check in the mail. So those are the 3 options we have right now. So if someone wanted to fill out the application and then complete that, of course, they wouldn't be doing it yet. Application should be submitted. They're supposed to be submitted 21 days before they want to operate. So when you're getting into August, if you're, for example, looking at operating in, say, September 1, then the time to get that application in would probably be around August 1st. And if they get it in the 5th or 6th or 7th, that's okay too. But 21 days in advance, and certainly not now or not in July. That would be just too early.
Okay.
All right. So then once those applications come in, that will be assigned out for an inspection. And actually, I'll be doing the incubator kitchen inspections. I manage our food program, but this is one thing I took over from the last person that was here. So I'll run that to completion for inspection. So once all the paperwork is in and complete, hopefully by then we'll be coming out. Actually, we will be coming out because we're already starting to go out some and doing live inspections again in facilities. And then we give you the thumbs up or down. Now this facility you built, been built by you guys. So it's a professionally built commercial kitchen scenario. So I don't envision any problems there. So it's more of a finality or a formality to come out and say, yep, good to go, and sign off and issue a permit for the operator to come in and start working.
And that will be a very exciting day when we have
Yeah.
that. And so for people who are trying to get their ducks in a row now, just to summarize, around August 1st, get your application in, and that when they are on file and they'll be, flagged as working at the commissary, once you say to me, okay, Laura, you have the okay, you have your health permit now, then all of those other people who have their applications in and have their payment in are ready to go as well.
That's correct.
Yeah, they're all triggered at the same time. So Joe, I have not seen the incubator permit application. So if you could send that to us, we will add it to the document that people are looking at and put it on our website.
Okay, I will do that.
That would be great. And then let's just very quickly talk about the importance of a food worker certification.
Well, yeah, that's really the most important part of food service. Handling food, first off, the food certification, our program that we have that I run is temporarily suspended because of Corona. So I was doing level 1 and level 2 classes here, but it's to expand the knowledge base for people working in food service regarding all aspects of food safety, focusing on some of the most important things they could do. When people do things right, we don't have events like, say, that holiday sauce perhaps at Marriott. We don't have the incidents that everyone saw on the TV at Golden Ponds. When people get up to speed in food safety, people take food safety really for granted because we all cook foods at home. We don't think much about it. We maybe wash some things, we put some things in a refrigerator, we cook some foods, we leave some foods out, and everything goes along just fine. But when you're dealing with the public, you have to up your game. You have to be on your best behavior, your best procedures. And the one thing that many people don't realize is that, I hear people often say, there's too many chemicals in our foods today. Well, I'm a food scientist per se. And here's the thing, 100% of all our foods are made of chemicals. So what causes foods to spoil, what causes microbes to grow, are part of those chemicals that are there. The protein that is there is a chemical, carbohydrates are a chemical, fat is a chemical, vitamins are a chemical. So there are a lot of scientific principles that actually go behind what I teach and what we look at in terms of keeping foods free from microorganisms and then keeping people well when people are preparing foods for them to serve to them. And that really applies. I encourage everybody that takes classes, don't just use this in your restaurant, use it with your own family. Teach your children about food safety as you go along. Proper temperature holding, preventing cross-contamination of foods when you store them in your refrigerator at home. Because when you learn things at home, you tend to take them away with you into a restaurant if that's where you work. And I believe that's so important. And the most important thing I think we do here, because we do lots of inspections, the most important thing we do is offer the education because, if someone comes away from the class and they're able to employ or use 3 or 4 principles they used or learned in class, that's what we're talking about in terms of decreasing risk of foodborne illness in people. And that's some of the most important thing you do, much more important than going and doing an inspection and citing a violation. I mean, we still do that, but it's a total learning opportunity for a dialogue, for a two-way street for participants that come in for the certification.
And of course, I would certainly think that anybody who is currently in food service or considering getting into it right now, given what's going on with the pandemic, is not going to disagree with you about the importance.
It's been magnified. It's been magnified, and education is so important on it for sure.
And so, also just to clear up for our audience that if somebody is a manager at a restaurant, and if somebody owns a restaurant, if somebody is going to be a member of the commissary, you have to have the manager level or level 1 food safety certification. So if you're on the fence of, oh, am I really going to join the commissary or not? If you plan to work at kind of a higher level in food service, this is a great investment in building your resume and your skill set.
Well, and to add on to that, there are 2 levels of certification. We have the level 1, which is the higher certification. Some people call it the manager certification. Which is
what we'll require.
And then we have the level 2. Level 1 is just a little more advanced, a little bit more in depth. And for everybody operating a commissary there, from what I understand, everyone's going to need to have at least one person there. So if there's 4 or 5 people that work in a particular commissary, if they have other employees, at least one of them will have to be a level 1 certified individual. The rest could be level 2, but at least one level 1. And then during all preparation, during all operating hours, somebody there, either level 1 or level 2, has to be certified there. And the 2 certifications or 3 certifications we recognize is ours here, and then Serve Safe, and then National Registry. Now, our program's not the only one that's suspended right now. All the live programs that have been around town are suspended too. So they haven't been doing them. There are some that are available at monroecounty.gov where you can see a link for some providers, some approved providers. But again, you don't want to just willy-nilly go on the internet and say, oh, this looks like a good place. You want to go to the ones that we have listed for links for certification. Again, Serve Safe and then National Registry. There are a couple online versions. That's where I'm going.
And I think it's, I mean, none of us have a crystal ball, but knowing that anyone who's interested in joining the commissary has to have their level 1 manager level, whatever we're going to call it, in place by the time we open. We don't know when in-person classes are going to start. So while I know that you think that you have the most thorough one, the Monroe County Certified Food Worker Program, but
well, I don't know that it's the most thorough, but it's probably the most lively because I've got lots of years of experience sharing everything that I've seen out there, and that's what makes it so enlightening for people.
yeah. Do you have any sense if you would start those in person again over the summer?
I'm hoping so. Again, I don't know, just as nobody else knows. So, we're waiting for, information from Albany in terms of what we could start, when we could start, and then in some internal discussions here too.
Okay, so I think probably that to close out this section, I would recommend that if people are looking to join the commissary September 1, then they should at least look into the online options if they don't already have that level 1 or manager certification so that they have it in place.
Laura, there's one more thing that you had on this question here was that the Good Manufacturing Practices course through Cornell.
And Bruno and Shannon are going to speak to that next.
Okay, because that was on my list.
Yeah. Sorry, that was an error.
Okay, because
so
I was going to say that's more for canning and commercial packaging, and that might involve then the USDA if someone was using meats or packing meats, United States Department of Agriculture, or if they were canning the products, that would be Ag and Markets. I don't think you have Alan Mosick here, do you?
No, Bruno and Shannon from Cornell Food Venture Center are kind of going to talk about everything package related. So what a wonderful segue. Thank you.
Okay.
And just to clarify for everybody, once again, the food worker certification is required if you're going to be regulated by the health department. If you're not going to be regulated by the health department, you will be required to get the Good Manufacturing Practices course if you're doing packaged food goods, that they're kind of the equivalent of each other given what you're doing. So with that, thank you for that smooth transition, Joe. We're going to have Bruno and Shannon get started. And just as a time check, everybody, it's 1:10. I think that they will present for about 10 minutes. We have a couple questions in the Q&A, but not a ton. So if you have a question in the Q&A or for the Q&A, put that in now, and we will jump right to questions once Bruno and Shannon are done. But I know that they will be thorough because they're very good at this sort of presentation. So if you two can unmute yourself and have your videos, I'll have you take it from here.
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this presentation. Thank you for the previous presenters as well. I'm learning a lot in here, and it's good to meet put a face to some of the people that we keep hearing about in our conversations here with food companies. It's very important that we have each other's contact information. But anyways, So the Cornell Food Venture Center is, as Joe was saying, is where you're going to go to make sure that you have all the practices in place to make sure that your products, the commercial products that you're making at the commissary in this case, or in any other commercial facility, are put in place, and that you are in accordance with the requirements by the regulation that applies. Of course, it's completely impossible to mention all the regulations and the needs that you're going to have to attend to in this process, but we're going to give you an idea following some questions that Laura sent to us specifically about which forms you have to file and some of the documentation that need to be put in place. And hopefully that's going to put the information in a good framework. Next slide, please. So the Cornell Food Venture Center is a processing authority. That's the regulatory term for what we do. So we have the knowledge and the resources basically to evaluate the risk that is inherent to your product and process, and issue guidance on how to make that process safe, or tell you what are the limitations of safety in that product. How can you then mitigate the risks associated with your product? We have a mission here to provide comprehensive technical assistance to farmers, entrepreneurs, and food companies pursuing new food products for the marketplace to enhance food safety and promote economic development. I like to state that mission because if you read it carefully, you'll see that our goal here is to make sure that food safety is not an impediment for small food manufacturers to bring their product to market. We want to make sure that food manufacturers, big and small, have access to the most advanced technologies and solutions to bring their safe products to market, in such that this is not, as I said, an obstacle to their success in the market. Next slide, please. So one of the regulations that you're going to have to be careful with is the food facility registration. And for most of our clients, certainly they will have to file the form 3537, food facility registration, and that's not to be confused with the canning facility registration, which is specific for those that are making shelf-stable products that fall under the FDA categories of low-acid canned foods, which probably not nobody's going to be making those products at the commissary because of the type of equipment that is required. But acidified foods and water activity controlled foods might be, and in that case, you will have to file the form 2541. They are not mutually exclusive. So everyone must file the form 3537, and depending on the product, you need to file another one. And that's when you have to come to a processing authority to determine if your product falls under one of those categories that are required to register with the FDA, and then we can guide you on that process as well. So the commissary, if I remember correctly, the commissary will not have a food facility registration on their own, because the commissary is not going to be holding the product. But of course, these things may change in the future. The important thing is that a form 3537 must be in place for the manufacturing activities here. And I'm looking at the questions here that Laura submitted to us. This is, if I'm not mistaken, a 5-page form. It's probably something that is going to take you half an hour to an hour to make sure that you have all the information there accurate in place. And for this form, your food does not need to be evaluated by Cornell. You will need to have it if you're making food. As I said, the 2541 form, which is a different regulation, is a different piece of legislation that requires that. You will need to know what kind of product you're making in terms of regulatory classification that will affect your needs there. That's why we recommend that you consult with us when you're bringing a food product to market. Next slide, please. as I said, the standardized means for us to deliver the information that you need to proceed with the registration of your product, and in some case, manufacturing facility as well, is called a scheduled process. In the state of New York, um, that's also called a process review, which is a more generic term. But basically, somebody with the proper expertise needs to look at the product and the manufacturing process before you bring that product to market. Every scheduled process is different, but in general, the scheduled process includes the formulation of the product. So you will be committing to using a certain formulation of that product that is can be flexible in some ways, but in most cases is very strict. You will be defining there what amount of each ingredient that you're going to use to make that product that is, as we call, a critical factor determining the safety of that product for a variety of reasons. So we will also consider the processing step and establish them in a way that, again, you will be committing to achieving certain levels of, for example, temperature, or the amount of time that the product has to be held hot, or how long you have to make sure that that product hits a certain cooling temperature. You may also need to ensure that the amount of salt or vinegar are at a certain level to ensure the safety of the product. And that's why we have critical factors there in red, is because those are extremely important. You have to keep records, and the records must be stored in a way that is defined by law as well. And all of those things, we can guide you, and we are evolving on the types of support that we can give to food manufacturers to make sure that the records are kept in a proper way. And that is the number one cause for, let's call it in general terms, for trouble. Whenever small food manufacturers have challenges with regulatory entities, it's because the records are not, the proper records are not in place, or they cannot be found, or the information that was captured was not what was necessary, and so on. The scheduled process also defines the storage, distribution, selling conditions, and restrictions. So it's going to be your guideline on how to make that product, how to make the product, distribute, and sell it. For many products in New York State, you're going to be required to have one. That's at the discretion of the inspector. But for FDA products, those that are shelf-stable, low-acid, acidified foods, and water activity-controlled foods, you are mandated to have a scheduled process prior to FDA registration. So usually, once you have a prototype of your product, you're ready to come to the Food Venture Center and ask for guidance on developing the process, and have a scheduled process issued for your product to go to the next steps with the regulatory agencies. Next slide, please. So in order to request your scheduled process, you can send us an email or go to a website, but basically you have to fill out the scheduled process form, in which all this information here will be asked. As you might have guessed from what I said before, we need to know the recipe, processing steps, how we're going to sell, to whom you're going to sell it, and add all kinds of information that may be relevant for that evaluation. We will require a sample for most products, even though we are trying to be as accommodating as possible at this time when our lab is operating on a very limited access to the laboratories. Currently, we can issue that scheduled process within 3 weeks. For those that need services expedited, we can provide that service within 5 business days as well, on an expedited cost. But usually everyone here can obtain information needed in 3 weeks. Next slide, please. We are also, we have a client registration form, and this is our attempt to collect as much information as possible about the business, because current regulations might put you in different regulatory categories that will depend on the size, location, and who you're selling the product to, and what kinds of products they are, if they are high risk or low risk products, for example. And we are trying to collect all that information to give you the best guidance possible. So everyone will receive that client registration form as well, which we ask you to fill at your according to the best information that you have. And that will also allow us to help you find partners that may help. For example, if you are processing products of a specific niche and you need help finding suppliers or finding suppliers of the packaging that you need, or companies that have a specific type of equipment that very few companies need. So if we have that information to begin with, we will be able to find those partners for you. And that's a result of the partnership between the Cornell Food Venture Center and the Center of Excellence in Food and Agriculture, which is also here at Cornell, but it's putting in some more resources on the table while we are developing food drugs, and the Center of Excellence will be able to provide us with the business side of the support, helping you find grants, finding specialists or companies and partners that may be necessary to make sure that your project is successful. So next slide, please. Shannon will now follow up with some information about the state registration using the 20C license. Shannon?
Thank you. Okay. So the 20C license is also known as the food processing license. It's under the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, and is required for all kinds of food processing, any operation that is going to be preparing food to be sold to the public that is not for immediate consumption, either through retail or wholesale markets. So this list briefly describes some of the things that are covered for someone that needs a 20C license, but is not limited to. And basically, if you're making anything that will be consumed off the premises, it will need a 20C license. Next slide, please. If you are a restaurant or cafe or any other food service establishment preparing food for immediate consumption, that would be under the local health department, as Joseph was explaining for us earlier. If you are going to be preparing foods for consumption at a later time and you are a restaurant, for example, if you're going to start canning your world famous tomato sauce that goes on your current lasagna in your restaurant, you can do so under your local health department license all the way up until those prepared foods that you're now selling for later consumption exceed 50% of your sales. So you've got quite a bit of an allowance to start preparing and processing foods for sale within that license before needing a 20C if you are currently under the local health department laws. Fees for the 20C license have recently changed, and in favor of spaces such as the Rochester Commissary, if you are a first-time applicant for the 20C license, you are free to get this application approved as long as you're going to be using a shared space or incubator kitchen. For small-scale processors, other than using a shared use commercial kitchen, if you've got 10 employees or less, the price is $175. All other processors, if you've got more than 10 employees with you, that is a $400 fee for the 20C license. And any of these circumstances, the license is valid for 2 years, or if you end up changing your business location, you'll have to reapply and go at the fees as usual. Once you've applied for the license, you will have a sanitary inspection from the New York State Department of Ag and Markets. They will come in and do a preliminary inspection that includes really assessing the space within your specific processing methods. So they will let you know if you have to make any adjustments, changes to the space, and will want to know specifically what you're doing so they can assess that best. And the food safety course certification, we did cover this a little bit already. You are exempt from getting a certification if you've got 2 or less employees within your operation or have an annual gross income of less than $3 million. The Department of Ag and Markets does have a list of courses on their website that are approved as part of this food safety course certification requirement, and you can find more information on that website. Next slide, please. In addition to the food safety certification, current good manufacturing practices are required for any type of food operation. The Cornell Food Venture Center does offer this course through our online system that everyone and anyone can take at your leisure. It's a self-starting class and is required for anyone producing food. So the sooner you get started on the course, the better. And in addition to that, record keeping, which a lot of the record keeping will be established with the scheduled process that Bruno explained to us. And all of the records that you must keep will need to be on the premises and accessible to your inspector for at least 2 years. So when being inspected, they can ask to see the associated record keeping that you've been taking and monitoring. In addition to the processing itself, they'll want to know things that include even the size of your containers, the code numbers that you're using, and further things that you can find within the scheduled process that is validated through us as well. In addition to that, product labeling. The things listed here, there are 5 very standard bare minimum requirements for product labels, such as identifying the actual product name, the place of the manufacturer, and the business if those 2 things are different. The ingredient declaration listed by weight, descending weight, and the net quantity of ingredients, both standard and metric form. Like I said, this is a very standard and bare bones list of what's required for your product label, and the FDA food labeling guide, which is accessible right online, can give you a lot more information and depth as to the details, even down to the font size for your nutrition facts and things like that. So definitely check out the FDA labeling guide for that as well. Next slide, please. And the list of exemptions for the 20C. Basically, if you are producing food for later consumption, everything and anything will require the 20C license unless it is included on this list. So farm operations, very simple, standardized processes such as honey, maple syrup, hops, and malts do not require the 20C license. If you are a home processor, and there is a very specific list of exemptions also on the Ag and Markets website, you can take a look. If you are fitting into that home processor's category, you will have to apply for that exemption. So that's important to note. And then if you're doing any kind of slicing, packaging of cheese at farmers markets, you're also exempt from this license. Or if you are some kind of small farm licensed through the state liquor authority for wine, cider, brews, beers, or distills, then you are also exempt. So this is a very short synopsis of the types of things that the Food Venture Center has information on. We actually do have a course that we offer throughout the year and is in development right now that will be offered online. So if anybody has further questions about that, please reach out to us. And I think this is our last slide, so I'll hand it back to Laura if you've got any questions.
Great, thank you everybody. So we are right at 1:30, and Bruno and Shannon, thank you. That was very thorough, and you guys went through a lot of information that is very valuable to the people that we know are going to be doing packaging. Just one thing I want to clarify, and it's a bit of a question too, is that because the commissary really is a place for you to launch your legal food business, we want you ready to have sales as soon as you open. We don't want you wasting money on your hourly rental when you could be doing some, testing, tinkering in your home kitchen. So Shannon and Bruno, they are people who are looking to do packaged food goods and have a 20C license, they are able to develop their scheduled process with you now. Is that correct? And then have it be approved by the time the commissary opens come September?
That is correct, Laura. Yeah.
Okay, great. So for those who are listening and planning to package food goods, get started on that now, because you want to hit the ground running and not be using our kitchen when you could be using your home kitchen. So we have, again, just if you have any questions, throw them into the Q&A. What I did not do at the beginning of this that I meant to do was give a little intro about the commissary. So I'm going to give an outro about the commissary. So if you could go to the next slide, Michaela. Where we stand right now, I'm not going to go into what the commissary is. You wouldn't be on this webinar if you weren't already familiar. But where we are right now is that we are opening at the beginning of September. If you go onto our website, on the join page of our website, you can begin filling out your application now. It's a little long. We're not requiring a business plan, but we want you to be thinking strategically about your business and how you can best utilize the commissary to grow your business. So the application is going to take some thought and it's going to take some time. Get started working on your permits and documents, hopefully either participating in the webinar today or watching it recorded later. You are feeling invigorated and ready to get those underway. I think you've certainly heard, as I have, that it's not too soon to start if you plan to join come September. We are going to need to see that you're working on all these permits and documents before you can be officially admitted to the commissary. You have to be a legal food business to sell food. You have to be a legal food business to join the commissary. So we need to see that you're working on that before you can be officially admitted to start in September or after, if September doesn't make sense for you. So once you have your application in and get started working on your permits and documents, please feel free to reach out to our email address, info@rochestercommissary.org, and we're happy to have a one-on-one session with you, just a quick half hour to touch base if you have any questions about the facility itself, about if it makes sense for you, whatever it might be. We're happy to do that, so please set that up. And I think that's it really for the commissary. So let's get to the few questions that we have. And I think it's a testament to how well all the presenters did that we don't have a lot of questions. So for Joe, is Joe on the call still? Oh, he may have left. Joe may have left. All right, well, he answered one of the questions, but I don't know if everybody can see this. Andrew asked this. For the Monroe County Health Permit, are you putting your home address or the commissary address? And there is a place at the top for the establishment name. You're going to put our address, which is 250 East Main Street, which you can see in the permits and documents outline that we've provided. The other question that's more for Joe, which I will have to get an answer from him later, is from Noy. And they're asking, basically if you can rent the commissary for a short-term rental if you are a food business operating elsewhere. But this is not your home kitchen. I believe the answer, the short, easy answer is yes, that is possible. I think you just have to get a temporary food permit for it. But I can get back to you with that answer once I verify it with Joe. We have two more questions that, oh, how many seats do we hold? Oh, in the front. You're going to, Andrew's asking when you look at the health permit. And Andrew, it's worth noting that Joe has not shared with me yet the incubator kitchen applications. That's specific to our space. Nobody else will fill that out. It's probably going to remove that because you're technically, the language is confusing, but we are called the commissary, but you're also applying for a commissary license because it's a prep kitchen. So I don't think the seats is going to be relevant because it is technically a prep kitchen. Although our performance kitchen does allow you to have seating, and that's a minimum of 14 people at our chef's table, but we can do bigger things in the days when we can do big events. So this question is for Matthew. Morgan is asking, if I already formed an LLC, but am not currently operating my food business, is it okay to now have a business bank account? Or I think she's asking, is it okay to not have a business bank account right now?
Yeah, so if you have an LLC in place and it has no operations, then it's fine if it does have its own bank account. There are some, or maybe some, annual fees or taxes associated with having the entity. So having it idle isn't always the best ideas. There might be some costs associated. If you already have operations for some unrelated business in there, then obviously you're going to need the bank account for that probably. Now, if you're thinking about running the operations of your food business through an already operating LLC, just as if you're doing, running those operations through yourself, the assets and revenue and everything else associated with that existing or associated with those new operations will potentially threaten the assets and whatnot associated with the existing LLC. So just like if you were, operating as one person, if you're operating them as under one entity, then everything's kind of potentially a jeopardy. So you can have more than one LLC, certainly. So you might consider, if that's the case, forming a second one for the food business.
Okay, and so to clarify, she meant to say that is it okay to not have a business bank account right now if you have an LLC that's formed but idle? It's fine.
That's
Okay.
That's fine to not have a bank account. It certainly helps if it's, and it might be a little bit different if it's you have other owners involved, but if it's just you, then that's probably fine for now.
But as soon as you start signing anything in the LLC's name, you got to have your own bank account because you want to keep your personal and professional finance.
Treat them like two separate people, because that's what they are under the law. And I'll add, I should have thought about this earlier when you asked your question after my presentation, Laura. So I should point out, if anyone's interested, the Volunteer Legal Services Project of Rochester, vlsprochester.org, has at least a quarterly, sometimes more frequently depending on demand, and they may even be interested in doing something specific for the commissary if there's going to be demand. A clinic helping folks, small business owners with limited resources, set up entities and answer other business related questions, review contracts, that sort of thing. So it might be worth reaching out to them. I've helped out, as well as some other HSC attorneys have helped out with those in the past, and we could help with formation documents and that sort of thing, so that they're a little bit more tailored and you have some kind of attorney backup on those sorts of things.
That's great. I thought that with the loss of the staff person, DLSP was not able to do things like that anymore, but that's not.
They were as of, yeah, they were as of, I mean, I did it last winter. So I think that they're still doing it. I haven't heard anything otherwise, but
Okay.
they still might be able to organize something for this group.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So one more question, Andrew, and you might need to clarify this in the Q&A if I'm not going to ask it correctly. So when is the sales tax figured, before or after adding the tip? When you add a tip to the bill, when is the sales tax figured, before or after adding the tip?
Yep. So gratuities, there's a distinction to be made between gratuities and service charges. If it's a true gratuity, meaning it's paid directly over to the wait staff or whomever, then there is no sales tax paid on that. It's considered income, and it's covered through that person's income tax. If you charge a service tax, then the answer is it will likely be taxable. Or excuse me, if you charge a service charge rather, then the answer is it will likely be subject to sales tax unless certain conditions are met that basically make it more like a gratuity. So if it's shown separately on the bill, if it's actually identified in some way as a gratuity, even though it's like a flat charge that you might put on there, 8% or 16 or whatever, and the business gives that entire amount over to the employees, then that service charge would be treated as a gratuity and there would be no sales tax.
Great. Okay, I think that's it for questions. So again, a testament to our presenters doing such a thorough job. For both the participants and the panelists, thank you so much. We went over, but I think it was worth it. We are going to figure out how to get this up on our website in an easy way for everybody to share. And please, if you know of people who should be looking at the commissary, suggest that they start by watching this webinar, because it was very helpful. And for those who are looking to join, just another reminder of kind of the things I went through here. Get your applications in and let's talk. And we look forward to seeing you all in September. So I think